This is Creative Banter. Once again off social media, my mind floats toward the idea of slow productivity, of slow growth, something which has been discussed ad nauseum between Ben and I, but its importance in this world of hustle and bustle cannot be overstated. This brings us to questions such as whether legacy even exists in the modern era, and if the supposedly endless options for making money are harming rather than helping us. Let's dive right into this, shall we?
So last week I was going to bring up something, but we got derailed on all sorts of other interesting conversations as we normally do. But you had announced a little while back that you're giving up social media again.
Oh, yeah. I told you it was bound to happen, and now I'm officially off Instagram at this point. So
what was it, the same reasoning as before or anything different? What's the story behind it?
Yeah, pretty much same reasoning as before. I mean, just I joined back up in September of 23 and was on it until I think I deleted my account again just in March now. And in that time, there were some benefits, like sold a print to one of our listeners. I obviously bought the Fuji GFX 50S because of being on there. Some connections and learning at different photographers like Taylor Picard and that kind of deal. But those few things just, to me, they didn't add up as benefit enough to stay on the platform, given I really wasn't posting anything. Besides like stories and everything.
Yeah.
And all that I would do is I would go on there and I might have a conversation, send a few DMs back and forth, and then I'd be scrolling endlessly. And screen time, of course, as we've talked in the past, had gone up because of that.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't good. It was just very addictive, and I wasn't getting anything accomplished like what I wanted to. And staring at a screen for hours on end is not the best thing in the world for your mental health or for you in general. So I just figured with all of that combined, like I said, really not having any benefit from it, just whatever. I'm done with it.
So it's been a little over a week then now, right?
Somewhere around that, yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen any changes in the screen time dropping off, or have you filled the gap with other various things that tend to hold our attention on our phones?
I've definitely seen a drop. I've been taking screenshots every so often of the various week-long screen time overview that they give. Mm-hmm. And if I look back at February 11th through the 18th, I spent about 7 hours on average on my phone throughout the week.
And that's 7 hours a day averaged over the week?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
essentially a work job.
That's a full-time job.
Yeah. And then the most recent one, which I think was last week's average, is down to about 3.5 hours.
Okay, so that's a very notable change.
Yeah, so I definitely I have a lot more work to do to cut it back, and I have to be very conscious not to supplement not having Instagram with something else, whether it be Reddit or Discord or games or any of that stuff. Really just trying to make my phone as boring as possible so that there's no reason for me to really use it and go on it. So I can definitely get that time down some more, probably closer at least to the 2.5 to 3 hour mark throughout the week on average. But the other thing that I have to be mindful of too is how much time am I spending, or how much more time now am I spending on my laptop because of being able to, or not having that interaction with my phone because my phone is so boring. Well, now my laptop's exciting again.
Yeah.
Which I haven't found to be the case all that much. I mean, obviously doing layout work has been pretty much my main culprit of screen time for the past week now.
So some of that time that you were spending with screen time on the phone, some of that has transitioned towards doing like work with the layouts and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been reading a lot more. I just started reading a new book that just recently came out, Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, which we can get into a little bit then. But
yeah,
been reading more. I've been writing more and just trying to, now that it's nicer outside, I've been spending more time outside and yeah, just trying to stay away from the screens and everything. So
yeah, so it sounds like it's been a positive change. And I think going into it, you probably, back in September, you probably had a feeling that this is where things were going to end up. But it seems like it more or less confirmed what you already knew.
Yeah, it did. Like I said, there were a lot of great connections that I made, but none that I can't sustain or couldn't have made through email or any other like Discord or something like that. So,
and I guess the other thing too is you could have, completely gotten rid of the app on your phone and just use a desktop interface if it's a matter of, connections and the messaging aspect of it. Since, there isn't really the experience of scrolling through stories or whatever is not as, it's not as addictive on the desktop. But I'm sure there'd still be that temptation at some point to give in and to put the app on your phone again, and then you'd be, back in trapped in that part again.
I could have gone that route, but even though the user experience for stories and for reels and all of that on desktop is not as nice as it is on the phone, it wouldn't have taken long for me to be like, oh, well, it is what it is, and just gotten sucked right back into it.
Yeah.
It's just that I guess, addictive behavior, the addictive tendencies because of it, the dopamine hits and all of that. I'm just better off without. I would rather not have that even as an option.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So tell me about this book.
Yeah. So Cal Newport wrote a variety of other books, but I found him because of Deep Work, which he wrote mainly as it's sort of this idea of not getting into a flow state per se, but spending time just really diving deep into the things that you're passionate about, the projects that you're working on and everything. And then he also came out with a book, Digital Minimalism, which I read, and then a follow-up, which was A World Without Email. And I haven't read that one yet, but nonetheless, Cal is he's a professor at Georgetown University, and his latest book is Slow Productivity, which goes through kind of like what we've talked in the past about the idea of slow growth and taking things like in a much longer time scale than the hustle and bustle culture, the grind culture that we've been inundated by.
Oh yeah.
And
nonstop.
So his big argument here is, especially when it comes to like knowledge workers, we get trapped into pseudo productivity where we're doing all these meetings where we're filling our days with stuff that really doesn't matter, where we're not getting anything done or accomplished. And he says that what we really should be doing is taking, again, this longer time scale to finish up or to create more of a legacy for our work rather than do a bunch of small things that ultimately don't matter. So I'm about, I want to say, a third of the way through it, something like that. And it's one of those, like, I don't want to say like obvious books until it's just one of those typical self-help books in a sense. Like it's the information there is obvious. It's been talked about for hundreds, if not thousands of years, going back to the ancient philosophers and everything. But it's still refreshing to read about new stories and just have some new twists on it. And I like his writing style. So
that's good.
Yeah. I mean, it's been enjoyable so far. And there's a couple little things to glean from it that are a bit newer. But really, it's just helping me to get into this mindset of really taking the longer longer time scale approach to things, the slower growth of things, rather than trying to get TikTok famous and then fizzle out within a couple of days. So
yeah, that's interesting. It does sound like, because oftentimes whether it's a book or whether it is a lengthy YouTube video or something along those lines, it seems like when it comes down to the core of it, it's kind of a bulleted list of, here's a few things, but sometimes it's a matter of, stretching that out to be, something more significant. So it is interesting how there is that take on some of so many of the things that have been known for a long time, but I think sometimes it's just a matter of how it's being presented and how it's being, reframed to meet whatever the current situations are. So that does sound interesting, but it definitely does sound like it's the sort of thing where there's certain aspects of human nature that, we are who we are. Things work the way they do for a reason, but sometimes it is refreshing to hear those things brought up so you can make, connections in your own situation. So
yeah, I mean, he kind of compares the current state of knowledge work, where even if we're working from home, it's all about meetings and, like I said, this pseudo productivity, this feigned productivity of we're doing all these little things that ultimately, at the end of the day, when we look back at our workday, we're like, oh, it's no wonder that so many countries and states are trying out 40-hour or 32-hour work weeks or 4-day work weeks and that kind of thing. And he compares it to back when we used to work in like factories and everything. And even before that, when we were like hunter-gatherers, in a section that I was just recently reading, he pulled some information from there where when we transitioned from hunter-gatherers to farmers in the agricultural revolution, we lost a lot of free time throughout the day where we could just do whatever. It turned from, oh, well, we'll go out fishing, but in between fishing in the midday doldrums where the fish really aren't biting, where nothing's really happening, we'll take a nap on the boat, or we'll just be thinking or doing something slow or more leisurely in between those times. Whereas with farming, it's 8, 10, 12 hours of nonstop work until we get to winter where we're celebrating everything. And then you get to the factories with the Industrial Revolution, and now it's year-long nonstop work. And the biggest difference between that kind of work and knowledge workers, from what he's saying, is that at least with the factory workers and everything, you had the unions that got built up. You had 40-hour work weeks that got put in place that were then protected, where if you worked anything over those 40 hours, you got overtime pay, so you were compensated like quote unquote fairly for it. But with knowledge work, you don't have those same sort of protections because you have your phone, you have your laptop, everything's connected all the time. So you go from the office working all day to going at home where you're working even more after hours and on weekends and so on and so forth. That is nonstop. But again, just not really coming up with any productive, you're not being productive through those times. So he says more of going along the lines of like the slow productivity of just taking a much longer time to get things done and to not really beat yourself up over the fact that the book that you're working on writing isn't done within a year's time scale. Like you're not producing books as frequently as, say, Stephen King. Like instead you have a few books or whatever that you're making that are throughout your lifetime, but they are very good books and that you can be truly proud of. But so I don't know. It's interesting book. I love all the little stories, like I said, that he intertwines into everything, the evidence that he tries to find for it. So
now, is it targeted somewhat towards people that are doing, well, I guess the question is, how does a person who is an artist factor into that? Is it, because you had mentioned like the knowledge based. I feel like as an artist nowadays, you have to be a bit more of the knowledge based side of things, or maybe in the past maybe not as much. Does it get into that at all in terms of how, like for artists, how that would apply?
I mean, he's definitely pandering more towards the like professors and scientists and those people who are working, who are already natively working on very large projects. And it's not so much for, or as obviously it isn't for people working 9-to-5 jobs and in the more factory set of workers where you have managers and overseers who are constantly breathing down your neck and that sort of thing, where you actually have a product to be producing.
Yeah.
Based on obviously the artist side of things.
Yeah.
There's definitely information to take from it. And like for instance, I'm thinking up different ideas as I have been for ebooks, for presentations and that kind of deal. And even the larger projects that I have, that's like the physical fine art books that I want to make, just taking on that slower approach of everything, rather than trying to churn out and get a bunch of attention on you from Instagram and social media kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely information to take from it, regardless what kind of work you do. But it is definitely aimed more at those who work for themselves or who have more freedom in their work life.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in the very beginning, the whole idea of slow productivity that he has come up with here kind of stemmed from the slow food movement that started over in Italy back in the 90s or so. And he goes through that story of how that got started and the other movements that it ended up sparking, such as this one, and starts in one area and then eventually it expands and it grows, and that's really what he would like to see for this. That this book is just the first stone on the footpath, so to speak.
Yeah, and I also see some correlations to some of the past conversations we've had in past several episodes. We're talking about the zone 2 training for athletes, where it's that slow progress. You're going slower while your body adapts, and then at some point able to perform at like a higher level, which could be seen as, something happening later down the line, but just doing more of that slow, methodical, not pushing things too hard, but then having the benefits of that later down the line. And you had mentioned legacy, working on things that I can't remember the phrasing that you had said, but it mentioned, focusing more on the things that would be your legacy as opposed to the short-term stuff.
The one thing that he referenced or the one type of worker that he references are like Renaissance scientists. So like Galileo and Newton. And he mentions how Marie Curie was one, but more of a recent scientist, but her story is fresher in my mind to reference here, where she was working on the term that she coined, radioactivity. And she started thinking about these ideas and this new element and everything that she was finding. And then she decided that despite knowing this was going to be an award-winning, like life-changing kind of event, this knowledge that she once shared was going to alter her path for forever. She decided to take a vacation, like 2-month, 3-month vacation, something insane like that, with her husband and young, close to newborn daughter, just at a cabin in the woods for a while. It's just this idea that, like, even though she has this one project that ultimately defined her, she still went out and took a long time to do it. And then you go back to like Galileo and Newton, where their theories that they were coming up with took them a decade, took them multiple years at least. And then that was their life's work, really. And then it completely changed everything about them. So they just dove headfirst into what they were passionate about and what excited them most, and took a while to release anything with it. But when they did, it's changed the world. Yeah. So that's kind of like along the lines of that legacy. I mean, there are a bunch of different examples that he gives too, from like authors like Jane Austen, and even talking about Benjamin Franklin a little bit, and in his later years.
And I can see how in those cases, having that slow progression, leading to that ultimate legacy. And it seems like that is something that is a lot less common these days, especially, as we were talking about earlier, the whole social media thing where there's not, when it comes to social media, what kind of legacy, is there when it comes to all this stuff? Because it seems like ultimately so much of what so many people are putting so much emphasis into means nothing in the long run.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, I was thinking about this the other day and I know we've spoken a bit about legacy in the past, but it seems like so many things that as artists that we do, having a collection of images on Instagram or wherever, at some point that account's not going to be around anymore. Instagram's not going to be around anymore. Having images on your website. Well, at some point that website's not going to be around anymore. And I was thinking about who is it that ultimately determines one's legacy these days? And I got to thinking that it still seems as though that is something that is controlled to some degree by the art world. Because that's where the history will be kept, where there will be records of stuff. And it seems like that is less attainable now than ever. So it seems like for the most part, other than just a select few, there isn't much of a legacy that as modern photographers can leave behind.
Yeah.
Maybe books on a bookshelf, but it's a tough one. It's a strange one these days.
But I think it's always been sort of strange like that. Like we've said in the past, and there's a quote that I read today that I don't remember who said it. I don't remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of you may take thousands of photographs throughout your career, and you'll pick through, or you'll cull down to hundreds of them to release in portfolios and whatever. But ultimately, you're going to be remembered for one or a handful. And even looking back at these scientists, at these referenced individuals in Cal's book, none of them at the time were really thinking, oh, this is what's going to make me famous. This is what's going to give me my legacy. This is what people are going to remember me by. I mean, he even said too in a footnote with Newton that the famous story that in, 1865? I might be getting that date wrong. The famous story of an apple falling onto his head and sparking this idea of gravity with him was a fabricated story that was just him. He made it up for marketing purposes to get his name out there even more and to help spread his fame, so to speak. So it wasn't until after he already built up this idea and shared it to the world, and the world reacted positively, that legacy was on his mind. Yeah. That he really wanted to dive headfirst into this. So, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. Your website, your Instagram platforms, really none of that is going to exist. For as far as we know, Instagram could be dead tomorrow. It's one of those things that you have to just focus on creating the absolute best work that you can, that ultimately you need to please yourself before you please anyone else. Like if you want to make photographs that people love, then make photographs that you love, and mission accomplished. And who cares about the rest? Because we are ultimately not the people that are deciding whether we are famous 20, 50, 100 years from now. Like, you look back in time and there are hundreds of photographers who are not remembered like that, but there's one that is. Like, I think of Ansel Adams, and his fame trumps everybody else's from that same time period. Like, it's just, that's the way that it is.
And it's a very, very interesting notion of how we don't control our own legacy. That is the narrative of whatever other bodies exist out there, if there is any degree of legacy whatsoever. But just think of like if there's a person who's really good at acting, ends up having a career in the movies, does really well, does all kinds of movies people like, their legacy is probably going to be how they die. I mean, like they die in some strange way. They drove their car into a tree. I mean, who knows what is? That's their legacy. All that hard work. It's just how they died. That's their legacy. There you go.
I mean, I think of like Paul Walker with that.
Yeah.
Like most people remember if you say Paul Walker to anyone, yeah, they might mention Fast and Furious, but the next mention is going to be his death and how he died.
Yeah.
Like it's unfortunate, but yeah, you've got a point there.
Yeah. Yeah. I had never really thought about it, but yeah, it's not something that we have any control over. And that's why it seems as though if an artist is to have a legacy, whether it's true or not in terms of whatever legacy it is, it's probably going to be determined based on whatever the opinion of the art world, if they're even deemed to be, worthy of having some opinion, so it's a strange thing. And that's why, like, I never even consider, I assume that there will be no legacy because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly.
So unless you're going through and changing things in some dramatic fashion, where history looks back at you, that's one thing, but very few people will have that. And I would be very uncomfortable to have some sort of large legacy. I'm like, I took pictures of rocks. It doesn't matter. It really, there's a tree in there occasionally. Yeah. But yeah, it's a strange thing. But I was also thinking, this past week about how when I was fresh out of college, this was before social media, there was never any thought in the back of my head that I could become a photographer. A lot of thunder out there right now. I doubt it's picking up on my microphone, but yeah, we don't get thunder and lightning very much here in San Diego.
Yeah, I can tell you're cutting out a little bit.
Yeah, hopefully things keep rolling good here. But I was thinking about how when I got out of college, I was into photography, but nowhere in the back of my mind did I think, I'm going to become a photographer, because it wasn't even an option. The photographers I knew, they did commercial work. They worked with clients for like magazine pictures or editorial stuff, and none of which I had any desire to do. So for me, it wasn't even on the table. I'm going to work this job at the camera store. At some point, I'll find something else to do. But then I was thinking about your situation with the job hunt, and thinking about how for people in your generation where, a person can become a photographer, they can specialize in anything. There's this huge multitude and precedence that comes with what everyone else is seemingly able to do these days, about how much pressure that must put on people who are graduating from college now, where it's not like, you just get a job somewhere, but now you have all the pressures associated with, yes, you can become a photographer, you can do this. And I was thinking about that the other day, about how difficult that must be now. And, like, it'd be like if I was graduating from college and be like, well, I could be a baseball player, I could be a basketball player, I could be a hockey player. It's like, no, I couldn't. It just wasn't even a possibility for me. And I was wondering if that has the fact that you see people that are able to have careers in these obscure things, what sort of impact that has on you and the job search, because it's got to put a lot of pressure on it. It's got to be a difficult thing.
Yeah, I mean, you look and you see people that are getting paid quite a handsome fee for eating on.
Yeah.
Just like taking videos of them eating and getting fat.
Yeah.
And then they transition to more fitness content, and they're like, now I'm getting fit and I'm getting still just as much, if not more money. I don't know that it really puts any pressure on me per se. Because it's still really difficult to make it as a full-time photographer, to find those sources of income and not be put off by the fact that if you want to make it as a landscape photographer, then you need to be doing workshops and print sales. And if you really, really, really want to be successful with it, you should be photographing in color and or the
Yeah.
grand vistas and so on and so forth. Like everything that I'm not doing, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of pressure that comes from that side of things too. But honestly, it's not something that I've given much thought into.
That's good.
Like right now, I'm kind of in that spot of, yeah, we have a lot of freedom for the kind of things that we can do in a sense, but there's also, I think that's also an illusion more than it is anything else.
It is. It's an illusion I think people buy into, which really can screw with one's mind. But you're right. It definitely is very much an illusion.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, you're not going to get out of college and become a pro athlete.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to happen. You had to have been working at that since you were a kid, essentially, to
Yeah.
get to that level. Like the same applies for everything else. But when you go onto social media, when you go online and you see, oh, so many people are making it as pro photographers, but the only reason why they're making it is because they're sponsored by Squarespace and all these other companies
That's
that
true. Yeah.
are sponsoring them solely because they are telling other photographers how to make it as a photographer. And
Yes.
that is how they're making it as a photographer.
It's like a snake eating a snake. Just like, yeah.
Yeah. It's just not realistic. It's,
Yeah.
like you said, it's an illusion is really what it comes down to. And you can do it. You can make it happen. But it's like, even with the degree that I have, I can't land a job either with a degree or like adjacent to it, because like companies want you to have very specific skill sets and really nothing else,
Yeah.
at least from my perspective so far with everything. And so I don't know. I just, like I said, I try not to think about it. I just am kind of doing my thing and trying to work on creating different revenue streams and like the zine, like writing for different publications
Mhm.
that are just going to help me to bring in some more money. And if something happens where it's not enough money to sustain my way of living and I end up getting a job doing whatever else, well,
Yeah.
at least I have those built in so that I have extra quote unquote play money or
Yeah.
just extra savings or that kind of thing from something that I enjoy. But
And kind of what, after I had gotten out of college, it was just the thing that you do was just get some sort of job. And it was interesting because there was, since there was no real possibility of doing photography for a living, it was so much simpler, but, and then you just kind of find some way of, working your way up. But man, it's gotta be, I think for until people realize how it still is very difficult. You can't just go out and just overnight, have some sort of overnight success and suddenly, have this huge income doing something very specific. Like there are some where that happens to them, but that is the exception rather than the rule. But people look at that. I think they aspire to that. And it just has to be a whole different level of thinking until people realize that, yeah, that's not how it works. It's kind of like getting struck by lightning, but in the reverse. It doesn't
exactly.
electrocute you. Yeah.
Yeah. I have no aspirations to be some sort of one-hit wonder, some like TikTok star,
Yeah.
get millions of views, do sponsorships for a year, and then fall off the face of the earth. Because
Yeah.
that's ultimately what happens to them. And we've
It
talked
is.
about it recently. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like, yeah. I don't know. I don't want that kind of fame. I just want something that is ultimately sustainable.
Yeah.
And that will grow with me at a slow pace and where I don't really have to think much about it. I can
Yeah.
just do what I enjoy most and go from there. And have the few people that enjoy my work enjoy it and want to support it because they want to support it.
Yeah.
And for no other reason than that. So
Yeah, that's good. So this past week was the time change when we're recording this. I know that we were talking about during the last time change in the fall how it was throwing me off big time. How did you handle the time change this time around?
Really hasn't affected me much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's weird to be tired at like, or a better example, it's weird to be preparing food around 5:30, 6 o'clock or so.
Yeah.
And to then not be eating it in the dark.
Yeah.
Like obviously having lights on and that kind of, but like you look out the window and it's dark
just
outside.
in a dark room. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm truly living my simplest life in the like 18th century vibes here with candles and everything. But
yeah. Yeah, it's weird. Like for whatever reason, and the reason I mention this is that with this time change, it's been an overwhelming positive feeling for me. Like there was no negative anything, no throwing me off. It's just simply like I've had like the best sleep. I've been more productive in terms of getting things done. And I don't know how to explain. I don't know how to, I guess, explain it. Yeah, I can't explain why it is the way it is. But for whatever reason, this one has not thrown me off. Whereas as typically they do. And I don't know why that is, but I just figured I'd mention that because I don't know. I've been good with it. It's strange.
I mean, I'm still waiting for the day that we finally, get our heads screwed on right and realize we don't need to do this.
Yeah.
We don't need to put ourselves through this torment twice a year.
We are strange animals. We are a strange species, just arbitrarily changing things. And also on that topic, I had another little bit of a revelation when I was on my recent trip, which was, in the day-to-day life, oftentimes we're looking at a clock in order to figure out where we should be, what we should be doing, everything along those lines. And when I go on my trips, usually, as part of that first day funk, perhaps, there's like this strange transitional period where just things don't feel right. Something feels off. But then I came to the realization that maybe it's a matter of me transitioning from knowing what I should be doing based on what the little numbers say on my wrist to once you're out in the field for a while, the only thing that matters is sunrise and sunset. And your body adapts to this different way of telling time just based on the angle of the light, the sunrise and sunset times and everything else. It seems like once I adapt to that, then everything is pretty smooth sailing. But I feel like there's like this time in between where I'm trying to transition between them that I think throws off my body, and then which in turn throws off my mind. And then I'm like, what's going on here? This isn't right. So that's another little observation I had from the past trip.
Yeah,
it's a weird one. It's a strange one.
It is, and my brain is fried because I'm spending more time outside, so I'm more tired than usual because influx of vitamin D and all that. Yeah, it is funny though how like you mentioned that, and like I had to go over to urgent care today because won't get into this much because it just irritates me, but the trying to get it scheduled in with like a doctor anymore is impossible.
Yeah.
At least in our area.
Same here.
I'm sure that's how it is like across the country.
Yeah.
Like my mom recently switched to start working for a different hospital, and so our insurance changed, and trying to get in with a doctor through this new hospital is like a 3-month wait.
Yeah.
Just for like basic primary care. For anything specialty, it's like you're scheduling out to the end of the year. And so I went to urgent care, and of course they always seem to have weird hours depending on where you're at. But the reality of the fact that in order to get something done or checked up on, when watching your like clock and figuring out like, okay, so if I have X, Y, and Z planned for today, I need to get all that stuff finished by this time to make it on time to go over and get checked or to do whatever. And planning out your day by time versus, like you said, when you're out in nature, like trips to Acadia or just hiking around, it's like I try not to look at my clock because I don't care how long I've been outside.
It doesn't really matter as much. Yeah.
Exactly. I just want to be outside, and I want to continue being outside. And, oh, look, the sun's starting to go down. And so, well, I guess it's time to go inside before I get eaten by a random squirrel. So,
yes. Yeah. It's something about the way that we are wired, where that is just a far more natural way for us to perceive the environment and perceive time even. And so that's something where I think I'm going to end up paying a little more attention to that on future trips, because I suspect that plays a role in there. Before we wrap up this week's episode, we have the artist suggestion, the photographer suggestion. So today's photographer is Jess Hobbs, so JessHobbs, and you can find her on Instagram at Jess Hobbs Photo. So she works primarily with film, all sorts of formats and all kinds of fun stuff. But what really caught my eye, she has all these beautiful photos of trees. And so if you were to look at her Instagram, the first 4 photos at this point are some black and white images of these really cool trees in a foggy forest. She also has a YouTube channel, but she also did a series recently where it is these instant photos of herself, where she overlays some of the comments that she receives through, whether it's, YouTube or Instagram or whatever. And that really caught my attention just because, that's something that I think that anyone who puts work out there and receives those kind of snarky and very mean-spirited comments, it's so strange that is just a quote normal thing and just a normal part of the experience with just how mean people can be to each other. So she has this really, really interesting series. It looks like there are 7 of those images and she has those on her Instagram. So I thought that was a very fascinating take. But digging back further into her work, she has some color images in the woods, and there's this really gnarly sugar maple tree that she's photographed many times, which is a really cool looking tree. So I love the fact that she's experimenting with all kinds of different mediums, different film stocks. I obviously always love tree photos, but there's some sort of urban decay sort of work in there as well. So really, 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 really cool work, and definitely should give her a follow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through this series, and I have 2 of them that are popped up, and like you say that it's especially sad when you get like any degree of fame, or when you put yourself out there, the number of just negative comments that you are bound to get from trolls, from whomever. But that's definitely the amount of hate that you get online is like tenfold that when you're a female creator.
Yes.
Like it's very difficult for female creators, and I think that's why we don't get a lot of female photographers that we see as much. Like, we have obviously Sarah Marino and Rachel Talabart in them, but I remember even when Sarah start doing YouTube videos, she would get comments from people online saying that they don't like her voice, or they don't like her the way that she gestures or anything like that. They would just pick out all these little details that didn't matter at all to what she was doing. And clearly that seems to be a unfortunate reoccurring pattern here with Jess. Like, looking at the one of this Polaroid series, and the comment that she has on here is, "If it's normal for you to be so animated, I suggest you stop taking sugar or see your doctor." Like,
people are horrible.
Another one that she has on here is, "Typical woman, farmer and photographer, can do it all. Be nice if you wore a little less clothing though." Just... Yeah, it's like you said, it's a fascinating little mini series, and she has some beautiful work. I'm not too familiar with her outside of what I can see from her Instagram, but still, it definitely speaks volumes to how we are as a society, that's what we point out, and that's how we want to treat each other, when she is, I'm sure, just like many other creators, just trying to share her passions with the world.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and I see that series as a way of like sort of taking power over those comments in a way. But yeah, it's definitely it was a very very interesting series to see. And it's also sad to know that those are just a small number of comments. I'm sure she had to go through quite a few in order to boil it down to, that set. But yeah, it's just, one of the reasons why humans are among my least favorite animals. Just, that's yeah. People, unfortunately, being people. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.